Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry Harris, and with us in studio today is one of our prestigious veterans from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Mac Chargualaf. Mac, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful that we could have you on the show because, of course, Veterans Day is coming up this week. And tell us a little bit about your background in the military as a veteran.
Well, when I was a young boy, I think when I turned 18, I just decided right away that I would just join the military. Even in the midst of the Vietnam War, a lot of us still volunteer to join rather than wait for the draft. So in December 1967, I entered the U.S. Army. And I went all the way up to January of 1988 and retired. I retired as a first sergeant in 1988. So far, my experience in the Army has been good. There were some bad times. There were some lonely times, And there were times that you say, I wish I was in a civilian life right now. Because my kind of job in the military requires me to be outside most of the time, even during the winter time, even during the monsoon season. You're still required to be outside, and those are miserable days for us. And the most that I was away from my family is about a year, and that's a long time. And the minimum time that I was away from my family is like 3 days. So that's pretty hard on us, being away from the family. Being in the military, is something that you and your wife must cope with. There's no other way out of that. When Uncle Sam says you gotta go, you gotta go.
You mentioned that there's a number of you that decided to enlist before waiting for the draft. Why did you feel that way?
Jobs are very harsh back in Guam, and it takes a lot of time, for an employer to give you a call, and you're just sitting down doing nothing. Well, I didn't do that. I didn't just sit down and do nothing. I go around the neighbors, and I go around all the villages in Guam, asking the people if they want their grass cut or what kind of yard maintenance they need to be done, and we do it. And that's how we earn our money before getting a full-fledged employment.
What do you feel was the best part about being in the military for you?
Retirement at age 38.
Really? And
Yes.
how was that for a paycheck when you retired at 38?
Well, it depends on how much are you getting before you retire, and they take 50% out of that amount, and that amount is what you get for your retirement. Right now, I can safely say it's around $1,500 a month.
Well, Veterans Day is coming up on Friday, and you, in fact, are chairing or leading the celebration of Veterans Day. And I want to ask you about that, but I do also want to give a plug for what is going to follow the Veterans Day ceremony, and that is a screening of interviews with local veterans compiled by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. That'll be Friday at about 2:30 following the Veterans Day ceremony at American Memorial Park. So tell us, you have a meeting coming up to help organize?
Yeah, this meeting is coming up on November 7th at 6 o'clock in the evening at the VFW Canteen. This meeting is for all Vietnam veterans. Like I say, that if you were on active duty from November 1st, 1955 to May 15, 1975, if you are on active duty during that period, you are considered a Vietnam veteran. But you have to be on active duty during those periods of time.
Give us those dates again.
November 1st, 1955 to May 15, 1975. You don't have to be in country in Vietnam to be considered a Vietnam veterans. You are in that era, time, and the U.S. Congress considers us a Vietnam vet.
Now, this meeting you mentioned on November 7th at 6 p.m. at the VFW, of course, that's in Garapan,
Yes.
right near Godfather's.
Right.
I think is a good way
Right.
to describe it. Is that open to all vets, or is that open only specifically to Vietnam vets?
No, that place is open to the public.
Oh, I mean your meeting. I'm sorry, your meeting.
The meeting is only open for the Vietnam vets, because we do have a part during Veterans Day, and our part is right after the keynote speaker. The keynote speaker is a brigadier general coming in from Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, and right after his keynote speaker speech, the master of ceremony is going to call up all the Vietnam vets to receive their lapel pins and also the commemorative letter or commendation letter from our U.S. Congressman Greg Kilili Sablan. And he will be handing out those commendation medal while the Brigadier General will be handing out the lapel pin. This will be the very first time that all Vietnam vets, if they all show up, will get their lapel pins and that commendation letter. So right after that, they will just return back to their chair, and before taps is played, the master of ceremony will call up all Vietnam vets in front of the court of honor and render a hand salute for the comrades that have gone before us.
Now, give us the details of the Veterans Day ceremony. Where, when?
Okay, the best way to remember Veterans Day is if you can remember the 11th month at the 11th hour on the 11th day. November 11 at 11 o'clock in the morning at the American Memorial Park. We're going to still hold it over there. We were tentatively scheduled to hold it right here in Susupi, but I think there was a snack in it that we had to move to American Memorial Park.
You know, it's funny, but I first heard about that 11th month at the 11th hour of the 11th day probably 15 years ago or more, and up until now, that's when I always know when the Veterans Day ceremony is going to be. It's pretty catchy.
Don't feel bad about it, because even veterans have a hard time knowing when is Veterans Day. So as a veteran, it's very important for me to remember that, because I've been there every year since I retire. Never miss.
Mac, why are the lapel pins for the Vietnam War only being given this year, finally?
During that period of time that I just gave out, from 1955 to 1975, it was known that there were 900 million of our U.S. citizens had worn the uniform. And up to date, there were 700 million are still alive around the country. So in order for the commemorative partners in Washington to reach out and give those veterans their rightful and official congratulation or recognition. They started to come out to the state and local people to see if they can be a partner and help out recognize our Vietnam vets. During that time, they call it's an ugly war. It's not a popular war. Every time we come back from Vietnam, there were no official recognition. Unlike the Afghanistan and Iraq, we reached out to all these vets. But for the Vietnam War, it's not a very popular war. I think they call us baby killers, simply because we do kill babies, but not actually babies, but they were actually grown up, and I think they were their families are whole hostage by the Viet Cong, that if you don't do this, we're going to blow up your family. So here's this hand grenade, take it up to those group of GIs, and then just pull the pin and then run back here, and your family will be free. So that makes it very, very hard for the American soldiers to protect themselves. We don't want to shoot this guy, but if no other means, when we have to. Basically, it's a very, very unconventional type of war. We don't even know who is the enemy back then. Anybody could be. It could be a woman. So maybe that's the reason why we weren't received too happily when we get back. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I think.
I really appreciate you sharing that perspective as a veteran with us, because for one, I think a lot of our listeners were not even alive at that time, and so they don't have a really clear understanding of what was the reception for the veterans at that time and why, and hearing you yourself explain things, I think really helps us get a better picture. Mm-hmm. Thank you for opening up with us.
Well, only in the States that they are not been recognized. But here on the island, when you come back home, wow,
You're
they
home.
Treat you like a king. Oh, yeah.
That's great. Well, let's give those important dates again. November 7th, a meeting at the VFW at 6 p.m. for Vietnam War veterans. And this is to prepare for the Veterans Day ceremony on Friday, the 11th month, at the 11th hour, on the 11th day. That's 11 a.m. at American Memorial Park will be the ceremony. And then following that, at 2:30 p.m. at the American Memorial Park Visitor Center, there'll be a film screening of the interviews of 5 veterans that have been sent to the Library of Congress for compilation. And you're invited by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council to come out to that. In fact, in the second half of our show, we'll be talking with a lady who is teaching people who are interested in helping to collect these veteran stories from across the nation, how they can become a part of this oral history project. But Mac, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you on Veterans Day.
Oh, thank you. I'll see you there.
Hafaday, this is Eulalia Villagomez of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Thank you, and Jesus Masi.
Welcome back to Your Humanities Half Hour. In this half of the show, we have a very special guest all the way from Los Angeles, and before that, Italy. Welcome, Dr. Luisa Del Guidice, to Your Humanities Half Hour, and welcome to Saipan.
It's wonderful to be here.
You, of course, are an oral historian and a fellow of the American Folklore Society working on the Veterans History Project. How is it that you came to be involved with the project?
Well, the Veterans History Project is managed by the American Folklife Center in Washington and the Oral History Association. And I am a member of the AFS, and so American Folklore Society. So when they need someone to do these workshops on methodologies, how to do interviews, this is something I've taught at UCLA and in the community, they count on professionals like us to go out and do these workshops, in this case specifically on veterans. So I've been doing oral history. I started with Italian folk life, folk songs. I was collecting songs in northern Italy in the mountains and done everything from, but it always focuses on the oral interview. The social sciences, ethnography, oral history, and folklore all depend on being able to interview people and talk to them and get information that way, first-hand information. And when we talk about oral history, it's really all about spoken memories, people telling you about their lives, how they experienced historic events. And it is a very powerful sort of bottom-up testimonial, first-person narrative that now is pretty common, and it got started in the 30s and 40s. In Colombia, 47, they started doing this kind of history after the war. And it was a way of supplementing the historic record. So you get the generals and you get the presidents and you get all the documents, but what was the soldier in the trench experiencing? How did he or she live through that experience? And so you really get the realities of war when you speak to the people who are fighting the war or supporting the effort in other ways. And that's what the Veterans History Project seeks to do.
What has your experience been working on this project as far as the people, the veterans that participate? What are you seeing?
Well, I am not so much involved in the interviewing of veterans. I'm involved in training others, volunteers, to interview veterans. So anyone can volunteer, anyone who has a family member or a community member, anyone who's interested in hearing and recording the stories and contributing to the permanent collection at the Library of Congress. So if you're interested in knowing how to do this, we can help you do that. And that's what I'm doing here on the various islands, today at the Northern Mariana College, tomorrow in Tinian, and then Rota, and then back in Saipan on Saturday.
Let's talk a little bit about the fundamentals of the training, of conducting an oral history. What would you say, or where does a person begin?
Well, you begin by wanting to do it, right? It takes an effort. Listening is hard work. You have to know sort of the basics, the techniques, but you also just have to be a good listener and willing to spend the time empathetically, to listen carefully, to have the person understand that you care about their story and honoring them. It's a great privilege to be before someone who has gone through that kind of experiences and willing to share it with you. It's hard. It's hard to remember what they went through. Sometimes it triggers really horrendous memories, and you have to be able to sit and tolerate the emotions, tolerate the silences, give the person the opportunity to tell their story. And it's as much about storytelling, you know, the way they remember and the way they tell it, as what they're telling you.
There are some who may say, well, the way the person remembered it or expressed it is not really the way it happened. What is your
common?
What is your thought on that?
Oral history is not the true history. Well, what we say to that is, this is a supplemental. It's an aid to the record that's out there. This is the way people have recollected it and the way they lived it. So you can't say that's not true. That's their experience of the event. So, you know, what is true, what is not true, it is its own truth. Oral history is its own truth. And you have to beware the single story. There are many perspectives on anything we go through. And so the more stories you collect, you have a better sense of the way people have experienced it. So you're saying that it's not true it's a problematic thing. Oral history is its own thing, its own approach to history.
Share with us, in your experience, what are some common errors that a novice oral historian, we're having a lot of volunteers come out, willing to interview family members and friends, some common mistakes that may be made, and maybe a few things that are most important to keep in mind when approaching the oral interview.
So one of the biggest problems is interrupting. We're always keen to get on to the next thing, and you have to be able to take your time. You have to focus. You have to learn how to listen and be in a conversation, and let the person know that you're really listening by, nodding or trying not to say it verbally, but just, eye contact. The other thing is just slowing down. Not having, you prepare your list of questions that you want to ask, but this is not a checklist. You're having a conversation. So you don't keep looking down at your list of questions. That's just not conducive to. And then you have to listen. You have to go with what the person wants to say, their rhythms. If they go off on a tangent, that's fine. You follow the conversation they want to have, and you follow up. So those are some of the things, the silences, the not interrupting, the being an attentive, empathetic listener, and having tissue because it's going to get emotional,
What does it mean to people, in your experience, for them to be able to share their story like this?
Well, it's in many instances the first time they have shared the stories. And often their families don't even know what they went through. And veterans will say, I've never even shared this with my family. So it's therapeutic. Being listened to is therapeutic for all of us, I think. It's an honoring and it's a wonderful thing to be listened to. And it's a great way to honor those who have served, and to have that remembrance and that recollection be part of the permanent record. So a veteran will always, once you've done that interview, you make a copy and you give it to that person. So then they have a copy, their family has a copy, and then the Library of Congress also has a copy. So that in itself, to have your life and honored that way, a permanent record, I think that's of value. But it's also of value to have your community memory honored, because as we just heard from Tina Sablan, who has started to interview veterans from here, this is the first time she's put those veterans on the map in the Library of Congress. So you can start to build up that collection and start telling your community history through war experiences.
I can imagine there may be some veterans listening who feel like their story, maybe they're older than the Iraq War. They didn't see combat. Nothing dramatic happened. They weren't injured, and maybe they're saying, my story is not that significant. What would you say to them?
I think that it is, we don't just want all the peak experiences. We want the complete picture, and that their experience of the war is important, and those who supported veterans was important. So the Veterans History Project is not just about veterans who saw combat, but also those who assisted and supported the war effort in many other ways.
How do you draw out an individual who may be reluctant or feel like they don't have a lot to say?
Well, you can't make a person contribute, But I think if they were to listen to some of the testimonies, and you can go online, you can go to the Veterans History Project and just start listening to some of the digitized collections. About 10% of the over 100,000 collections have been digitized. So I think you can just meander and browse through and listen to some of these testimonies, and maybe you will be inspired as a result. But then just that your community wants your memory. I think that in itself might encourage you to come forth. And not everyone will, and that's okay.
Do you find that participating in these interviews has any impact on the interviewers as well?
Yeah. Yes. Those oral historians who have done work with Holocaust survivors, with others who have experienced traumatic moments and events, always talk about being haunted by these interviews, that it can have an effect on the interviewer as well. It's not easy to be a witness to these stories and not have them affect you. So it affects the interviewee because they experienced it, but it also, and if you happen to have shared similar experiences or in your family, then there's going to be a bond, but also some of the harder things that will come back to you in the middle of the night, things that you heard that once you've heard them you can't unhear. It's hard. These stories are hard to witness to, but because they're hard stories is maybe why they need to be heard. Because it gives the realities of war. That's what this is about. For future generations to hear from the veterans themselves what the realities of war were and continue to be. They change, of course, with generations and with the kind of war that's waged, but there's nothing that can substitute for that.
And as you said, there's a lot of times a form of catharsis or healing that can come from sharing these things.
From storytelling. Storytelling. There are many ways that veterans have healed themselves, and one of them has been art. Writing their memoirs can be a way, or just telling the story can be another way. It can get that out, and that, it is cathartic. Kind of a cleansing memory.
Well, we want to thank you for coming so far to train our people on how to be good listeners and how to help document these valuable stories. Do you have any final thoughts before we go? I wish we had more time. I wish we could air the entire training.
I just encourage anyone who has an interest in helping, and veterans who may want to contribute, to get together and do this thing. It's important. It's important for now, but it's also important for the future. Your children and your community, your future community is going to come back, and you never know who it is that's going to want these stories, but record them, and they'll be there for them.
Our guest today has been Dr. Luisa Del Guidice of the Veterans History Project training here in the Northern Marianas for this very important project. This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.